Max Verstappen on the brink of a race ban following a huge penalty in the Spanish Grand Prix following a collision with George Russell, to the extent that Nico Rosberg called for him to be disqualified. Elsewhere, Oscar Piastri claimed a lonely victory, and Lewis Hamilton was perhaps his most downbeat in 2025 so far. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parkson. Ian, it was looking set to be a pretty uneventful Spanish Grand Prix. It's got to be said, a very interesting strategic race for what it looked like until lap 55, with Kimi Antonelli being forced to retire, which, well, to put it simply, caused complete and utter chaos, in particular for Max Verstappen.
Oh boy, Nick, where do we start with all of this? I mean, it's just a roll call of things that built up over the course of that Grand Prix, with Max Verstappen's frustration quite naturally getting the better of him given the circumstances. To give people some idea as to the way things eventually conspired against him, throughout the course of that Grand Prix, you could sense Max's frustration, as I say, just getting more and more. He was becoming more and more animated. And as I say, his frustration was rising. Throughout the Grand Prix, he criticised grip, lack of grip, criticised the brakes on the car, criticised the clutch. And then ultimately, he just turned around and said, the car's broken. So you knew, even though he was actually in the fight on what was a relatively good three-stop strategy from Red Bull, that at least allowed Red Bull and Max to place a degree of pressure on Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris in their front-running McLarens. Nevertheless, as you say, once that safety car came into play, that's when all hell broke loose on Max Verstappen's side of the garage. Naturally, safety car was deployed. Everybody pretty much dived in for a new set of tyres. Naturally, with only a handful of laps left, safety car was deployed on lap 55. Given what happened to Kimi Antonelli, that meant there were only 11 laps left of that particular stage. You would have assumed everybody coming in for soft tyres, except Max, who was placed on a brand new set of hards. Now, for me, I think this was Red Bull's biggest mistake. Christian Horner has explained that the thinking within the garage was that a brand new set of hards was better for Max to race on than an eight lap set of softs. I think Max should have taken track position. I think he should have taken the lead of the race. And as I say, it was only 8 laps old, that set of sets, and forced McLaren to try and make their moves on Max. Max, as we know, great defender. Yes, okay, the McLaren duo might have been on new softs, but 8 laps old? Surely, Red Bull, you should have given Max the track position, as I say. Anyway, Max came in, had the hards bolted on, immediate frustration again, rising over the radio, was not happy with that set of hards, because naturally it takes them longer to get up to temperature. Safety car remained out for quite an inordinate period of time, I thought, 5 laps in total. When it finally came in, you saw the McLaren duo, Oscar Piastri in particular, because he was in the lead of the race, backing Max up to such an extent that you knew the temperature was going to drop like a stone on those hard tyres that Max had got. By the time Oscar and Lando bolted away, Max then was forced to do what he could on these hard tyres with Charles Leclerc behind him. As we saw, just as lap 61 started, lap 60 was ending, lap 61 started, Max had this awful, squirrely moment in his Red Bull. How on earth he caught that car is quite extraordinary. But naturally, it allowed Charles Leclerc to get a run in behind him. The two touched quite strongly. That led to one steward's investigation post-race. And I'm going to come on to another anomaly in a second. A few laps later, with Charles Leclerc eventually getting the better of Max Verstappen, Max was then in a battle with George Russell. And the fact that Charles Leclerc was ahead played a little bit of a part in this, because it's one of those that when George was making his move on Max, where was the position of the car in relation? Now, Red Bull's thinking, they ultimately told Max to give the position back to George. And on review, there was no need to do that. Even the stewards have turned around and said that Red Bull did not need to give the position back to George. But if you cast your mind back to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in Jeddah, Max, of course, was alongside Lando in a battle there. Red Bull did not order Max to give the place back, 10-second penalty. So you can imagine with just a handful of laps to go when that safety car came in, the thinking that was going through the Red Bull strategists' minds, as in, if we don't give the place back, we might get another 10-second penalty. That's going to pitch Max way down the pack, and he might only get a point or two. So naturally, he was instructed to give the place back. When Max was told to do that, all hell broke loose inside Max's helmet. He exploded, it's fair to say. Expletives, anger. And as we came out of turn 4, he then slowed. And George managed to get alongside him, but never actually fully passed him. And then as we're approaching turn 5, Max decided to speed up again. And from the overhead camera, it clearly looked like Max deliberately drove into the side of George Russell. Now, we know these two have got history from what happened in a race late last season. Nevertheless, the stewards on this occasion acted swiftly on this one. They gave Max Verstappen a 10-second penalty. Here's the anomaly, as I just mentioned it. Why did they act so swiftly on that one, which for me was a more contentious issue, that this one should have been judged. They should have dragged Max into the stewards' room to explain his actions. Whereas with the Charles and Max one along the start-finish straight, they decided to hold fire on that one and have them both explain what unfolded. No further action with regard to Max and Charles, because they felt it was 6-1, half a dozen of the other, no driver wholly or predominantly to blame. However, for Max, 10-second penalty immediately applied, but the key thing here is 3 penalty points added to his license. He's now got 11 for the calendar year. He's 1 point away from a race ban. He has to get through Canada and Austria, but Austria cleanly the next 2 races before any points come off his license on June 30. These 2 races are huge for Max Verstappen and Red Bull.
And actually, a similar point to what you've just made, in that the stewards were so quick in that turn 5 incident with Max Verstappen. I don't get it. But what's also then weird on that point is you have obviously the George Russell incident, the first one at turn 1, where even that decision was made after the race. If they were quick on that one, then actually there's a very good chance, given there was no further action into that, that the turn 5 thing would never have happened.
Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind, one of the things that's going on when you've got a race unfolding like that, and so much action is taking place when the safety car is pulled out and there's only 6 racing laps left, there's going to be a lot of action. Drivers jostling for position. They're on different tyres. Obviously, Max on the hards. Everybody else in front and behind him were all on softs. The sole exception to that was Esteban Ocon, who'd remained on the mediums. But every other driver was on soft tyres. There was a danger that in placing Max on those hards, that he was going to be caught by a bunch of soft tyre drivers anyway. So why not just give him the track position and let him do his damnedest to keep everybody else at bay behind him on 8-lap old softs? That's one of the contentious issues. That's a big mistake from me for Red Bull. But as you just pointed out, why the discrepancy in these stewards' decisions at these key times? Yes, as I say, there would have been a lot going on for Rui Marquez and the race director, and obviously the stewards to look at and digest, and at various stages. So a lot to take into consideration. But for me, the Max and George incident should really have been left to the stewards to determine afterwards, because it was, for me, way more of a contentious move than the one between Max and Charles on the start-finish straight. As you say, Nico Rosberg turned around and said he should have been black flagged. Black flag means automatic disqualification. Anthony Davidson on the Sky Pad, in reviewing the incident, and obviously with all the angles that Sky has got, unfortunately there was no Max on board for that one, so we've not quite got an idea as to what Max was doing with his steering wheel turns, etc. But nevertheless, Anthony Davidson pointed an accusing finger at Max Verstappen. other people I've spoken to in the paddock have made it quite clear that Max was at fault for this one. And George Russell, let rip. We will get onto that obviously next.
Well, and of course, one of the people that you mentioned there, obviously Nico Rosberg's comment, he was on punditry duty for Sky F1 in the UK. As you pointed out, said that Max should have been black flagged, which, as you also pointed out, is basically what a driver would receive to be disqualified from a race. Christian Horner, it's fair to say, didn't really agree with what Nico said.
Of course he's not. Of course he's not going to agree with Nico Rosberg. Described him, and obviously a few of the viewers might agree with this, because Nico, in his commentary, his punditry role, his commentary role, naturally has to throw some hand grenades in there and be contentious. Well, obviously, Christian Horner described Nico Rosberg as being quite sensationalist in his punditry. So make of that what you will, folks. Nico Rosberg, of course, got to appreciate the fact that he is a Formula One world champion, and his view has to be respected. Christian Horner, quite obviously, was always going to take an opposing view. Defended Max, tried to explain the strategy, tried to explain how things unfolded. And yes, with that call to hand the place back, they felt it was in the best interests of Max, fearing, as I've mentioned, that possibility of again of him being handed a 10-second penalty. The irony is, of course, in being told to hand back the place and then having that incident with George, he was handed a 10-second penalty, which dropped him from 4th on the road to 10th, so only a point.
And of course, you spoke to both Max and George after the race. I imagine they had quite differing views.
Yeah, George was first up, and he did not know what Max was thinking. Was there any hangover from last year? Wasn't quite sure on that one, but nevertheless, he said, I've never seen anything like that in Formula One. I've seen it in karting, I've seen it in sim racing, I've seen it in iRacing, but I've never experienced like that inside the cockpit of a Formula One car. So another point that he raised as well, that he knew of only one other driver in his experience who would pull off a move like that. And he was referring, not by name, but we can kind of gather the inference that he was referring to Dan Ticktum in Formula E, because he did mention that it was a Formula E driver. We know Dan Ticktum, of course, doesn't quite have the best of reputations given his character and personality, which sometimes explodes behind the wheel of a racing car. George also said that Max had let himself down, that for any young kids watching, it was not the way to go. And then, of course, when Max came into the pen afterwards, the first point or the first question that was raised with Max was that actual George comment that for kids watching, maybe he'd not set a good example. Max, brilliant, sarcastic comment. Next time, I'll bring a pack of tissues. Obviously, he wasn't best pleased with George's whining and crying, is the way he probably felt. Nevertheless, Max explained himself, went through the way the race unfolded for him, that with all the strategy that he thought that he might have been in play, that he was trying to push the McLarens ahead, but he wouldn't explain his rationale or his thinking overall when, with regard to the George incident. He said he described it to me when I asked the question as simply a misjudgment. As I say, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of opinions, a lot of viewpoints on this topic, Nick, in the comments section below. As always, folks, do your best to give your discerning opinion. Naturally, we take them all on board, but please try and keep it as clean as possible, nevertheless.
We will discuss this topic in a lot more detail in Monday's podcast, because there is just so much to dissect, and we've still got, well, everybody else to dissect and discuss. But very quickly, I will pause it here just to let our viewers know that today, Sunday, when you're watching this, is the final day to be subscribed to the Racing News 365 channel if you want to be in with a chance of winning a scale model Formula One helmet of your favourite driver. To enter, you've just got to be subscribed. If you're already subscribed, have no fear, you're in the draw. Best of luck. The winner will be announced on Monday. Moving on, Ian, because it's already been 15 minutes, believe it or not, but what we say, a big incident to discuss. I mean, what two drivers to say there's not a lot to discuss about are the McLaren boys. A near perfect day in particular for Oscar Piastri, converted pole position into victory. He's now 10 points ahead of Lando in the championship. McLaren 197 points now in the lead, running away with it is fair to be said. But ultimately, a 1-2, as good as it gets for McLaren.
I think we can almost say sayonara to the Constructors' Championship. McLaren now so far ahead. And yeah, just a comfortable weekend for that team. Naturally, the really hot conditions played to McLaren's strengths. We know what their tyre usage is like in these conditions. They only needed a two-stop compared to the Red Bulls, or certainly Max Verstappen in particular, that have to go to the three-stop strategy. But at least we kept them honest for a certain period of time. And up until that safety car was heavily discussed, he was in the mix. Would have naturally, I think, grabbed a podium position, but he has now obviously considerably dropped away from Oscar Piastri. 49 points, I believe it now is, Nick, if I'm not mistaken. That's two race victories worth of points. He is now behind Oscar. You can never rule Max out. I'm not certainly going to do that. There's still 15 races to go.
A lot.
Basically 15
Yeah.
races to go. Well over half of the season still to go. Still a lot can happen. Still much can unfold. Max, for me, is still in it. But naturally, this was a race, or certainly the instance that unfolded towards the end of the race, that he could ill afford to have done without in terms of hanging on and keeping Lando, and in particular Oscar, honest in the driver's title back.
And of course, Lando's chances of victory were kind of over in the first corner after falling behind Max Verstappen. But again, we'll discuss another mistake.
Off the line.
I know another one. We'll discuss that in the podcast as well. Just to run through the top 10 very quickly, Oscar Piastri claimed victory ahead of Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, who recovered from 7th on the grid, Russell in 4th, Nico Hulkenberg, yep, you heard that right, we'll discuss him in a couple of minutes, in P5, Lewis Hamilton in 6th, Isaac Hadjar in 7th, Pierre Gasly, should I say, in 8th, Fernando Alonso in 9th, finally getting some points, and Max Verstappen in 10th. Let's discuss Ferrari, because Leclerc, as I pointed out, a brilliant performance, going from 7th up to 3rd. Excellent race pace. The same can't be said for Lewis Hamilton, as I said at the top of the show. Arguably the most downbeat he has been this season. Just zero pace. It seemed was asked by Ferrari to let Leclerc pass. And actually, you asked Lewis in the pen if he was annoyed.
To which he didn't actually express himself verbally. He just nodded. In all honesty, Nick, I know the viewers and listeners might laugh at this. I actually had to refrain myself a little bit. Bear in mind, I am in the pen, and there are microphones placed in position by F1 to pick up all the driver's audio. Folks might not know that, by the way. So it allows it to all be recorded, and then anybody who wants it can just use a QR code and can pick up the driver's audio that they needed. So I had to rein it back in a little bit myself, because I was actually going to ask Lewis, given the way everything was going, he just was not answering any question. It was one-word answers. He was so downbeat. It's the worst I can remember Lewis in a pen for quite some considerable time. So I was going to ask him, Lewis, you must feel pissed off. But I didn't. I reined it and I said, Lewis, you must feel annoyed, to which he simply nodded. This was, I think, the worst. Well, he explained it himself. This was certainly the worst day he's experienced with Ferrari so far. No pace, which was in complete contrast to his qualifying, because ordinarily Lewis has not been great in qualifying, but when he's needed it most, he's pulled out great race pace. Well, complete reversal this weekend. Decent qualifying pace, out-qualified Charles Leclerc for only the second time in 9 Grand Prix this season. And I'm just using Grand Prix, not the sprints, by the way.
Yeah.
And for the first time since the second race in China. So I talked about this on Saturday's post-qualifying update, Nick, that I was fully expecting Lewis, with good race pace, to be a challenger, certainly to George and Max ahead of him, maybe not the McLarens, for a podium position. Never transpired. Just nothing within that car. Ultimately, he was asked to cede position to Charles Leclerc, who was naturally quicker, and just nothing for Ferrari and Lewis. What are you going to do? What's the plan now going forward, Lewis? What, you're going to be in the simulator? You're going to work with the team a bit more to try and get on top of this? Shrug of the shoulders. I don't know. Lost. he looked completely lost, bereft of any confidence in that car, and you just don't know where he's going to go from here. This was, as I say, as downtrodden, as downbeat as I have seen Lewis Hamilton look for quite some considerable time.
One driver who most certainly did not come across as lost is my personal driver of the day, Nico Hulkenberg, from 15th to 5th. I mean, a phenomenal drive in what is kind of being dubbed as the weakest, if not one of the weakest cars on the grid this season. But I mean, phenomenal from the German.
Yeah, we got to give them a shout out. Look, we spend so much time talking about the drivers at the front, then quite obviously when there is a good performance, let's at least big them up. And why not? Stake have had Sauber, whatever you want to call them, folks. Thank God it's morphing into Audi next year, and we can just simply call them Audi. They scored points in the opening race of the season with Nico Hulkenberg there, and it's been a real struggle after that, a real struggle. And then today, or this weekend, they brought a raft of upgrades on the car, new front wing, naturally, like many of the teams, but this one also had aerodynamic elements to it, not just to adhere to the new technical regulations with regard to the front wing flexing. Nico had a great launch, great first lap, made up positions, and from there he said that actually helped transform their race. That made them think a little bit more outside the box as to what they could do in terms of getting in even higher and into the points. So much so that after the safety car restart, we saw the sight of Nico Hulkenberg overtaking Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari. Jonathan Wheatley, the team principal, said, wow, that pretty much made their weekend. It was like transformational for the team, and it's also transformational in terms of their Constructors' Championship hopes now, because they feel that they are now firmly in that midfield pack mix, which we know is super tight between all the teams down there: Alpine, Aston Martin, Williams, of course, Haas. So those lower half of the table Constructors' Championship positions, and bearing in mind the money associated with each position, it's going to be a huge fight for those teams through to the end of the season. So yeah, well done, Stake. They've got another big upgrade coming as well somewhere down the line, 3 or 4 races time. If that one can build on top of this one, who knows where they might be next.
Just finally, we need to, for our last talking point, cast our minds back to Saturday night, and a few hours actually after we did post-qualifying F1 update, and all of a sudden notifications went crazy, and a very good reason for that, which is why we only had 19 drivers in the race today. Lance Stroll withdrew from the Spanish Grand Prix on medical advice, and what's interesting is that he was actually placed under investigation after qualifying for not getting weighed immediately. Remarkable.
Yes. Now, just to help people very briefly with the regulations, as soon as a driver's qualifying session is over, he has to make his way down the pit lane to get weighed. So it's pretty much, as I say, immediately. Do not stop for a chat. Do not go for a drink or anything like that. You've got to go and get weighed. Well, it's transpired that wasn't the case. Lance did not go down the pit lane, and they actually went out the back of the garage. And we then learned subsequently that he had sustained a significant injury to his right wrist. Now, people may recall that ahead of the 2023 season, in a cycling accident, Lance went and broke both the right and left wrists. Nevertheless, he made the most astonishing recovery that week. 6 days after that, he competed in the Bahrain Grand Prix. Now, it seems to be that this right wrist problem is one of those that has just got worse and worse and worse, as I've been told over the past few weeks. And the pain was such that Lance wanted to immediately get it treated and looked at. And this is why he did not go and get weighed. Subsequently, medical advice has turned around and said that he should not continue any further for the weekend. Apparently, he's gone off to maybe undergo a minor procedure, we're led to believe, to now further correct whatever pain and discomfort he is experiencing in that wrist. Is it going to be okay for the Canadian Grand Prix? Well, as I've mentioned, 6 days after undergoing surgery, he was competing in the Bahrain Grand Prix. So I would fully expect him to be okay for his next race, which of course is famous in Canada.
And of course, we do send our best wishes to Lance for a speedy recovery, to hopefully be back in the car for his home race, because you never want to see a driver miss the home race. Ian, that's 25 minutes. Absolutely amazing stuff. A lot to explain, a lot to get through. I hope the viewers have enjoyed that. If you have, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, not only if you enjoy our videos, but also for the last chance to be involved in that giveaway, as I mentioned. And also comment below your thoughts on the race, the Max Verstappen incident, and any questions you would like us to answer on Tuesday in our fan questions video reflecting on the Spanish Grand Prix. Ian and I will see you on Monday for the podcast. The only thing left to say is see you later. Bye, guys.
And as always, folks, take care.